All right, let's go to another subject.
Sure.
Let's talk about what it feels like to be a gay man in 2017. We are on the brink of a new president. We have a whole new dynamic going on in society, and it's going to be a bit of a long talk, I think, this point, but I want to focus on two main elements of this question. The first is the obvious, what is fearful for you and what scares you about where we are. But the second is what excites you and what brings you hope with where we are as of this point in time.
I think I'm going to sandwich the fear in the middle of both sides of the equation, because that's kind of my experience. I came out in 2011. In 2011, the world was quite different than it was before the election.
Yeah.
Well, I'll state it that way.
Before the election of
Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in that time, it was a really exciting time for me because of some things that were going on in society. The gay marriage issue was at the forefront. I had...
was that Prop 8?
Well, Prop 8 was in California in 96.
Oh, really?
I'm not sure.
I remember a lot of Prop 8 going on in my life in California around 2009.
Sorry, I'm confusing that with the state of Oregon in, I think, 94 or 96 was the first state to amend their constitution to forbid gay marriage. Oregon was the first state where that amendment was passed.
Gotcha.
And then by 2011, things had changed. We were starting to get gay marriage on the East Coast, and then eventually gay marriage was voted in Washington, and there was a move to put it on the 2014 ballot in Oregon, but earlier that year, the state Supreme Court, based partly on the United States Supreme Court, made gay marriage legal in Oregon. In fact, one of my friends, who were a couple for 40 years, they were the first married couple in the state of Oregon.
Oh, cool.
On that day. They were standing at the courthouse, and they were married like 30 seconds.
Like, we're ready.
30 seconds after the Supreme Court announcement was made, the Oregon State Supreme Court. So, and on one hand, I'm not ready to get married. It doesn't really affect me, but I was amazed at how impacting that was for me, because all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute, I'm a real member of this society too. And certainly that wasn't the end, but it was a major turning point.
Yeah. To not feel like you're just brushed off to the side anymore.
Exactly.
When it comes to society.
To feel like I have the real rights of a real American. Living in Portland is a great place to live. It's a very welcoming city. It's a very open city. There is a display at the Q Center here in Portland that is Queer Heroes. And it is a photo display with like 3-paragraph biographies of some of the Portland leadership that has changed attitudes and laws in Oregon over the last 40 years.
Yeah.
And it's pretty amazing to see what some of the people I've met here in this city, actually where they started and what they accomplished over their lifetime.
Yeah.
Really inspiring. And so living here feels, for the most part, really safe.
Yeah.
And I don't, I have lots of friends here. I'm the staff orchestrator for the Portland Gay Men's Chorus. I'm an active member of the Radical Fairy community, and I have lots of places to hang out with my gay friends. And that feels like I have a community and like I have a place to belong.
Yeah.
And that's what's really important.
Yeah. If you don't have community and people that you can bond with that are like-minded, and it doesn't mean in the gay world only or in the straight, I mean in any world, as a musician, as a spiritually minded person, as a yogi or whatever.
Right.
If you don't have that community, you're going to become depressed, isolated, and your happiness just goes down, and then illness begins, and it's not a good
And I
situation.
experienced that the first year I was here.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have the skills to really build a new network.
Because right when you came out, you had to move from the
Right.
city that you were in,
Right.
the city that I left when I left high school.
I had lost everything there, and I had to rebuild. And I thought, if I'm going to rebuild, I might as well go where I want to be.
Yeah.
To rebuild, and Portland was where I wanted to be. In fact, I probably would have moved up here within 2 years anyway. So I just decided I was moving.
Yeah.
But for that first 6 months, in my telephone, the number of people that I knew longer than 4 months was exactly 3. And that was really devastating.
Which is crazy because you guys don't understand. We had a church community of about 3,000 or 4,000 people. And my memory of our childhood home was every Christmas season, we'd have 75 people coming through our house for different events. Some of which were when you would teach the choir, we would have these big Christmas shows. We'd have 100-voice choir, and we would do Christmas Eve services. We'd have 5 Christmas Eve services, and between the 4th and the last one, we had a long enough break where you would cook food for 100 people to come through our house.
Right.
And we had this extremely loving open door
on
policy.
purpose?
Yeah. I know. Why would you put yourself through that?
It was
But
fun.
then for me, that was a huge thing that still honestly affects me.
Yeah.
How I don't feel like either one of us and our family, I don't feel like we have that same amount of community.
Right.
Whereas as at that point in time, we had hundreds of people always in and around, and it was such a huge, open and loving community.
Yeah.
And now it feels like 2 people call, during the season.
Yeah.
And that's it. There's very few people that come through.
For the last 5, we used to get hundreds of Christmas cards at Christmas. For the last 5 years, I have received 1 every Christmas. Thank you, Sharon and Tim.
Yeah, the real friends out there, they really show themselves throughout this process, and I can understand that maybe there were people in the middle of this extreme where they just didn't know how to respond.
Sure.
And so they kind of fell into this neutral zone, and that's how they fell out of touch.
Yep.
But it is disappointing the ones that actively pushed you and our family out.
And what was more disappointing for me was people, I understand them not knowing how, but I would have appreciated someone at least asking me questions.
Yeah. Just getting involved.
They just disappeared.
Yeah.
And nobody's ever heard, until this moment, nobody's really heard my side of the coming out story.
Yep. Which is why I wanted to do this, because I think it's completely idiotic that people assume to know what you've gone through, assume to know who you are,
Right.
and yet the only action they've ever taken in order to have this story is push you out of their life.
Right.
So,
Right.
But because we're getting down to like the last 10 to 15 minutes of this,
Sure.
let's jump back to the 2017 and
Yep,
Donald
yep,
Trump.
yep.
I really want to talk about how you are feeling Portland being affected, because as we're filming this, it's just after Christmas 2016. We're right on the brink of 2017.
Yep.
So technically Donald has not been in office yet, but already there seems to be massive change in how people are interacting with each other.
Yeah. And, part of it is politicians promise all kinds of things. Whether they can actually pull it off or not, who knows?
Yeah.
So on one side, there's not a lot to get, there's plenty to be concerned about, but why waste energy being upset about it at this point?
Sure.
I think in the queer community in Portland, there are lots of layers to this. There's the gay marriage question. Trump has vowed to reverse gay marriage. I don't think that's constitutionally possible.
Yeah.
But he's put on his transition team, or his cabinet, I'm not sure which, one of the leading opponents to gay marriage. And actually the founder and the president of an anti-gay hate group. And that's very concerning.
Mm-hmm.
On the very local level, there has been an uptick in, I wouldn't call it gay hate crime, but gay harassment.
Mm-hmm. Well, but you've told me that some of your friends have actually been beaten up.
Yep.
And they're physically harmed.
Yep. There have been beatings. Reed College is here in Portland, one of the most liberal and affirming and inclusive colleges in the country.
Yeah.
And the week after the election, there was graffiti on campus,
Mm-hmm.
threatening both minorities and the gay community. And so there is some of that acting out. But it's not as bad here as it is other places.
Of course.
And
but if it's happening here, I can't even imagine how it is in some other state.
Exactly.
Where you're talking about maybe a 18-year-old or 21-year-old young gay man or woman
Right.
that has to deal with the ignorance of Southern America or something like that.
My roommate, a year ago, moved to New York to pursue his career. And he is an African-American gay man living in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
and traveling by bus every day.
Yeah.
And subway, and sometimes bus. But he spends his whole life looking over his shoulder,
Yeah.
because it's not that there's open hostility, it's that there is permission to be hateful.
Exactly.
And what I see that was dangerous in Trump's campaign was that he made it acceptable to hate people,
Exactly.
certain groups of people. And when it's acceptable to hate them, then it's acceptable to hurt them.
I completely agree. And that's, from my perspective, the most idiotic and hurtful thing that could be happening right now, or ignorant thing that could be happening right now, is people feeling that just because a orange Oompa Loompa with a toupee decides to say,
I raised you better than that, Kevin.
I have to put it out there. That's how I
it's the
feel.
truth.
I don't understand how somebody with that amount of hate and that amount, even like, let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say
Right.
that maybe he doesn't actually act on any of that stuff
Right.
in his real life.
Right.
He is still 110% responsible for giving the human population of America the right to feel justified if they choose to take action on their hatred.
Yeah.
And he is inspiring people to break the only law in existence, which is do no harm.
Right.
And he is directly responsible for that.
Yeah.
And it's my prayer and my hope that the awakening going on right now, and that's exactly why I have this blog, is to talk about the awakening, because we can spend way too much time talking about the negative,
Yeah.
but there is an awakening going on, and we are, as a collective society, changing.
Yeah.
And it's my hope that the conscious individuals will outnumber the ignorant individuals.
One of the most exciting things that happened right here in Portland in the week after, the week after we made national news for the riots here in town. And you can't believe everything you get from the national news, because they wanted to make a big deal about all the destruction, all the windows broken, and the baseball bats and all that. That was about 50 people
Right.
that came from Seattle to use the protests in Portland as a cover for their mayhem.
Mm-hmm.
The Portland protests were very peaceful, and they were focused on some very, very real issues. and some of the more local issues not related to the election at all. But what inspired me the most about that,
Water break.
furball, what inspired me the most about that were that there were 2 or 3 days in a row where there were large protests, and they were happening in the middle of the day in downtown Portland, and they were completely organized and marched by middle school and high school students.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember a time in my lifetime when high school students were that engaged in the political process.
Yeah.
And to me, that's one of the most exciting things to come out of 2016.
Yeah, that we're finally coming together in peaceful revolution. And I'll put a cap on this whole point by saying, I think that we are on the verge of a peaceful revolution, and I will no longer call them the mainstream media. I'm deciding to call them the legacy media because they just won't give up anymore.
Okay.
But they're not mainstream because
Right.
there's been a lot of statistics online that I've seen where 85 or so % of people no longer trust mainstream media
Right.
as if they're actually telling the truth. So with that being said, the peaceful revolution and the conscious awakening that's going on will not be reported on Fox News, on CNN, on ABC. It's not going to show up there.
Yeah.
And what they are going to show is the 2% of negativity that goes on in the whole situation.
Right.
And they're just going to focus on that to try to let the rest of the country, to try to build a vision to the rest of the country that shit's going down in Portland.
Right.
But the real thing that's going down is people are stepping up to the oppressors and saying no more. And we're not even fighting them. We're
Right.
having peaceful sit-ins.
Right.
And we won't stand for that anymore.
Yeah.
So for the last part of this conversation, I would love to wrap up with what is what
Let me cap that one.
yeah.
I think one of the things, my prayer for 2017 is that we get a handle on truth. There has been so much, we hear about false news, but I think it's really a challenge when you don't know where to go to find truth.